A central figure in the attack on the U.S. Capitol has been handed the stiffest prison sentence so far. A judge ruled that Enrique Tarrio, one-time leader of the far-right Proud Boys, will spend 22 years behind bars. While not physically present during the January 6th riot, he directed others and celebrated afterward, saying in a text message, "Make no mistake, we did this."
You heard it there on NBC News. Enrique Tarrio, one of the leaders of the Proud Boys, has been sentenced to 22 years. Yes, he'd already been convicted of all of his conspiracies surrounding January 6th, but he's breaking that record from Oath Keeper. What was his name again? Stewart Rhodes. Stewart Rhodes only got 18 years. That guy that wanted to celebrate going to prison. Enrique Tarrio has broken the record, and as we know, maybe we'll break some more records. They still got more guys to go. But here's more about how he got those 22 years and the things that he was dancing around and saying in court. Let's go with this.
Prosecutors had sought 33 years for Tarrio, but Judge Timothy Kelly decided that was too long. Kelly also sentenced 4 other Proud Boys last week to lengthy prison terms, but far less than prosecutors had asked for. Tarrio and 3 other Proud Boys were convicted in May of seditious conspiracy. Prosecutors said their goal was to orchestrate violence to keep then-President Trump in office, and that the Proud Boys were behind every major breach of the Capitol during the attack. Afterwards on CNN, Tarrio ridiculed members of Congress who huddled in fear as rioters breached the building.
I'm not gonna cry about a group of people that don't give a crap about their constituents.
But a different tone in court today, telling the judge, "I am not a political zealot," and saying to the men and women of law enforcement who answered the call that day, "I'm sorry."
I'm sorry. I'm a tough guy. It's weird how guys go from I'm tough to I'm sorry once they're in front of a judge and they've been convicted, and now they're facing 22 years. Yeah, 22 years. We'll see how much of that he serves, but at least the sentence seems somewhat feasible. I think people were thinking he was gonna get much less, considering how bad guys always get off when it comes to being in connection with government corruption like this. But here's some more details from NBC News of how this whole thing went down. Tarrio was not at the Capitol on January 6th though, crazy. He was arrested about 48 hours before the attack because of his actions at a previous pro-Trump event in Washington. Pause. You know what that previous pro-Trump event was in Washington and what it ended up being? It ended up being him, collected with a few other Proud Boys, ripping a Black Lives Matter sign off of a historically black church in Washington, D.C. and burning it, putting it all over whatever cameras and videos that they can put it on, and celebrating how badass they were. Then he was arrested a couple days before January 6th because he was in town to take part in what he was helping to plan. Let's continue because I just said it, let's read it. Tarrio knew a warrant was out for his arrest, thanks to a Washington police lieutenant who has since been charged and pleaded not guilty. Prosecutors said that the evidence suggests Tarrio strategically calculated his arrest as a means to inspire a reaction by his followers. Keep all this in mind after you heard him say, "I'm sorry and I didn't mean to do all this stuff," because this is what he really believes. To Tarrio, January 6th was an act of revolution, is what prosecutors wrote. They argued for a terrorism sentencing enhancement, saying his actions were clearly intended to influence the government. The judge agreed, applying the terrorism enhancement in his case, as he did for his other 4 co-defendants, why they're getting so many years here. But his defense attorneys thought that this one thing would work, Ray. He said, "My client is no terrorist. My client is a misguided patriot." That's what lawyer Sabino Jarugui said, arguing that his client went to Washington just to protest, that's all. "My client comes from a country," this is the other part about this. "My client comes from a country where there are no rights, there's nothing," he said, talking about Tarrio's Cuban heritage. He was trying to protect this country, as misguided as he was. He's just a figure that's been misunderstood, and he just wants justice because all he knows is Cuban. Tarrio's defense team also argued for a downward departure from the sentencing guidelines, seeking an unspecified lower sentence. And they submitted letters of support to the court. And one of those included one from a cousin of Tarrio who has worked for Miami police for 16 years. Don't forget, remember there was a police officer that tipped him off that there was a warrant out for him too? What's the point of having someone who works in law enforcement if you can't have connections? Sorry, there's the back end of that. The defense had asked Kelly to see another side of Tarrio that is benevolent, cooperative with law enforcement, useful in the community, hardworking with a tight-knit family unit and community support. Ray, it's odd that someone with tight-knit community, with great family, has police officers in his family as a cousin, comes from a horrible country, and he's now a reformed great American, would do such a thing. It might make you wonder that you can be from a tight-knit family, have law enforcement in your family, come from some other country that we deem worse than us, and then still do horrible things. So every time they tell you that criminals only come from single mother family households and are at-risk youth and are black and brown folks only, maybe you'll believe it, but when it comes to coming from those communities, we can use that to say they shouldn't have any consequences for the things that he did.
Yeah, so a couple of things about this. First, I think that Cubans would be interested to learn that they have no rights. They have nothing, according to Tarrio's attorney. Just there are no laws and no rights in Cuba, so that's one thing. But also, I'll just say that Enrique Tarrio is a really fascinating character because they say that he's worked with law enforcement. This is true. This guy has been selling out his fellow patriots for years, right? He's been making back-end deals for quite some time. But also, Enrique Tarrio was running a t-shirt press company where he would sell not just right-wing slogans on shirts, he would also sell left-wing slogans on shirts. This is a man who was an opportunist. He was cashing in on what he was doing. So, but the idea that he was not, a true believer in Donald Trump is irrelevant to what he actually did. Because if he was just playing a character, he was just playing a character who committed heinous crimes and deserves to be in jail. And even if he was playing a character, which I think is a lot of what the argument in his defense has been, even if he was just playing a character, that character inspired people to be involved with the Proud Boys at as the video said, every major breach of the Capitol on January 6th. So, it's the rule of goats. At a certain point, it doesn't matter if you're just playing a role of this macho guy, leader of the Proud Boys. That person is real to the people that he's inspired. That person was real enough to commit crimes. So it's irrelevant whether or not he was just cashing in on a grift. That grift has resulted in him having to spend the next 22 years of his life behind bars, deservedly.
Well, as they also point out throughout all of this evidence, he was texting about it, they posting about how it is, never give up, this was totally us, all that stuff. So I don't know if there was much of defense about what it is that he did, or if it's just they should have some leniency because he's one of our guys. Who cares? What does the law have to do with that? I thought it was blind justice. There's other aspects of this that show just how little remorse he actually has for this, outside of the fact that he was just trying to make some money and also maybe somehow come up with some kind of revolutionary name for himself. It's an unimportant person that wants to be important, and they found some levels of it. It's just it was based off of crime and corruption.
For more political news breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/thedamagereport. And you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.